Colette, I think we can start.
Want to go to the next slide, please? Well, good morning and welcome to Refuel Your Community, Redeveloping Gas Stations into Community Assets webinar, hosted by the New Jersey Brownfield Assistance Center at NJIT. I'm Colette Santasiri, Executive Director of the New Jersey Brownfield Assistance Center at NJIT, which is the first of its kind and only center that solely focuses on and serves New Jersey. It is a free resource to all of New Jersey's county and local governments and nonprofits. And I'll discuss our assistance and our programs later on in this webinar. In today's webinar, we'll be discussing how redeveloped gas station properties can reinvigorate your community and promote economic development. We'll discuss common contaminants found at gas station properties and how that contamination is generally cleaned up. We'll talk about environmental liability issues as well as sources of funding to clean up these sites. And then we'll hear from representatives of 2 New Jersey communities about their experiences and strategies regarding closed gas stations. Next slide. Joining me today are Mary K. Morelli, Vice President of GZA, which is a consulting firm and an affiliate member of the New Jersey Brownfield Assistance Center. Robert Crespi, an attorney from CSG Law, which is also an affiliate member of the New Jersey Brownfield Assistance Center. Sean Vroom, the Director of the Brownfield Assistance Center. Robin Lapidus, Executive Director of Love Flemington. And J.R. Capasso, the Brownfields Coordinator for the City of Trenton. Next slide. Before we get started, there are some housekeeping items to take care of. All participants will be muted during the presentations. At any time during this webinar, if you have a question, please type that question into the Q&A pane at the bottom right of your computer screen. Please don't type the questions into the chat section. A recording of the webinar, as well as a copy of the presentations, will be made available on the New Jersey Brownfield Assistance Center's website, which is www.njit.edu/njbrownfields. And at the end of the webinar, there will be a post-event survey. We kindly request that you complete that survey. Your input is extremely important to us. So let's get started. Next slide. No matter where you are in New Jersey, whether you're in a big city or a small hamlet, in a rural area or suburban development, you are bound to see closed gas stations. Gas stations are in decline. According to the Department of Energy, there are roughly 25% fewer retail fueling stations in the U.S. today than at the peak in 1994. While these closed gas stations present a blight on our communities, they also present opportunities to become community assets. There are, however, some challenges in redeveloping former gas station properties. Underground storage tanks and contaminated soils and water may exist that need to be dealt with. And gas station properties have smaller footprints than other properties, and that limits the type of redevelopment that can occur on the site. But gas station properties have some advantages. They tend to be in high-profile locations at high-volume intersections with excellent visibility and easy accessibility. Their proximity to retail as well as residential areas are also an attractive feature for redevelopment. Next slide. While there is no community benefit derived from these abandoned and closed gas stations, their cleanup and redevelopment can result in a cleaner environment and land uses that would benefit the community. Many gas station buildings have been repurposed as restaurants and coffee shops and other retail such as floral shops, as well as offices and even residential uses. Not all gas station buildings are repurposed. Many are demolished, leaving a clean slate of redevelopment potential. Before these properties can be redeveloped, they must be examined to determine if contamination exists, and if so, how to remediate that contamination. Mary K. Morelli from GZA Consultants will discuss this topic in more detail. Welcome, Mary K.
Thanks, Colette. I'm Mary K. Morelli, a licensed site remediation professional, also known as an LSRP. I'm also an associate principal with GZA. I have over 28 years experience. Over all these years, I have remediated hundreds of these underground storage tank sites or UST sites that I like to call them. I'm truly excited about all the new funding opportunities for redevelopment for each of these sites that we'll hear about later in the presentation. These gas stations can be returned to productive use, and this morning I'm going to give you a general overview of gas station related contamination and the process involved in remediating these abandoned properties as brownfield sites. Next slide. Driving around the state, you'll find abandoned gas stations in just about every town. Most people don't consider them a brownfield site, but most all of them are. In New Jersey, brownfields are properties that are abandoned or underutilized because of either real or perceived contamination. The key point here is for gas stations to be considered a brownfield site, they need to be vacant and have either perceived or real contamination. Next slide. These abandoned gas station sites are in every county in New Jersey. The New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection, or NJDEP, has a great tool called Data Miner for consultants, developers, and municipal officials to see the number of potential brownfield gas station sites in their own towns. The NJDEP has created a database that lists UST sites for possible brownfield redevelopment. You can easily view the sites by municipality. This is an example of Sussex County, where I happen to live. As you can see at the top, Sussex County has 34 sites listed, and in my town, we have 4 sites listed as possible brownfield redevelopment. The letters PI after the number refers to preferred ID number. The NJDEP assigns one master PI number to each site. Sites can have multiple spills, but all use that same PI number. I have spoken to numerous municipal officials that were not aware that they had sites classified as brownfields in their town, and therefore not aware of the possible redevelopment opportunities and funding for these sites. This database can be a great resource. Next slide. How do I clean up these eyesore sites and develop the site into best use? First, you need to understand how the contamination got there. This illustration shows you a typical gas station that has leaking underground storage tank. As you can see, the gasoline leaked from the tank and has impacted the soil and groundwater beneath the gas station site and possibly impacted the neighboring house with vapors and groundwater contamination. Scary stuff, right? No, not if you have the right team on your side that can help you through the entire process. These sites can easily be cleaned up under the Brownsfield program and put back into best use. Petroleum contamination under the right conditions degrades naturally over time, making it one of the easiest types of chemicals to clean up. We know a lot about how petroleum contamination dissolves in groundwater, and we can accurately estimate how long it will take for the contamination to degrade to concentrations below the NJDEP standard. That's the kind of fun stuff that I like to do. Next slide. New Jersey requires all petroleum underground storage tanks at gas stations to be properly registered. This slide presents an example of a typical tank summary for a gas station located in North Jersey. This listing details the size and types of tanks and the dates they were removed. As you can see on this slide, this former gas station has 2 different generations of tanks, 4 4,000-gallon unleaded gasoline tanks and a 550-gallon waste oil tank that were all closed in 1989, followed by 2 6,000-gallon unleaded gasoline tanks and 1 8,000-gallon unleaded gasoline tank that were removed in 2018. This information is available for all regulated USTs on the NJDEP Data Miner website. So if you're interested in a certain UST site, you can access this summary and be able to see if the tanks have been removed or if they are still in the ground. In that case, the tank status would say active or out of service. Next slide. In New Jersey, during underground storage tank closure projects, LSRPs are required to follow a lot of different regulations to close the tanks. Before fieldwork can begin, the UST registration needs to be up to date. The LSRP will then file an online notice of intent to close the tanks with the NJDEP. This needs to be completed at least 14 days prior to the fieldwork. The LSRP or LSRP representative also needs to be present to oversee the removal of the UST from the ground, as well as during the remediation activities. New Jersey also requires that any individual or firm working on UST closures needs to be closure certified. The removed tank needs to be evaluated by the LSRP or the representative for any holes, pitting, or corrosion. If a discharge has been confirmed, the NJDEP hotline must be notified. And here's what I mean when I say confirmed. The LSRP may observe gasoline contamination on the soil or groundwater, or that may happen later when the LSRP receives the actual soil sample results. You will have 1 year after the UST closure to submit your UST closure report. If there was no discharge from the tank, it would be called a site investigation report. If there was a discharge, the report would be a remedial action and a remedial investigation report. If any contamination is detected above the NJDEP standards, remediation must be completed in accordance with the NJDEP requirements. The NJDEP has a guidance document that includes detailed sampling protocols for us to follow and determine if contamination is present and how and when a groundwater investigation is warranted. Next slide. Upon removal of the tanks, the LSRP or LSRP representative will examine the removed tank, base, and sidewalls of the excavation for any physical evidence of soil contamination. These pictures are from a tank closure in Morris County, New Jersey. As you can see, the tank was in very poor condition. We observed several large holes in the end of the tank. We could see evidence of a discharge. At this site, gasoline was actually floating on the groundwater surface. So that was easy. The NJDEP hotline was notified and we obtained a case number that very day. At this site, after the tank was removed, we excavated and disposed of about 800 tons of petroleum contaminated soil. We were able to obtain clean soil samples from the resulting excavation, completing the soil investigation in one shot. At this site, we collected approximately 8 soil samples from the sidewalls and base of the final excavation. The number of samples and sample locations will vary depending on the size of the former tanks and the presence of groundwater. Soil samples must be collected from beneath the former piping and dispensers to evaluate if they have leaked also. In general, during UST closures, when a release is observed, soil remediation almost always includes the excavation and off-site disposal of the petroleum impacted soils. It is very easy to know when you have a release when you're removing these tanks. You smell it. Post-excavation soil samples are taken after the closure and remediation is complete. If the post-excavation soil samples results are below the NJDEP soil standards, your soil investigation is complete and no further work is required for soil. If the soil samples are above the NJDEP standards, you must complete a remedial investigation to delineate the soil exceedance and a remedial action to address these soil exceedances, or hotspots as I like to call them. Next slide, please. To accomplish this, you have many options available. Today, I'm only going to touch on a few of these. You can remobilize to the site and complete further soil excavation and remove the hotspots, or your LSRP can try to utilize one of the many NJDEP soil compliance options that are available to show compliance. Some of these include soil compliance averaging or the development of alternative remediation standards. That includes the calculation of a new site-specific soil standard for the parameter that does not meet the NJDEP standard. This slide showed you a listing of several different types of soil compliance options the LSRP could use to obtain compliance. These sites often use more than one of these options. When you are leaving impacted soil in place at a site, you will need to implement a deed notice and engineering control for the contaminated area. The NJDEP approves and issues a soil remedial action permit once the deed notice has been filed. Your LSRP will be able to advise you on what NJDEP soil compliance options would apply to your specific site, taking in your needs and overall redevelopment goals into consideration. It's important to note that future use of a site will play a big role into how the remediation proceeds. If future plans for the site includes a park or residential housing project, you will need to remediate the soil to the NJDEP's most restrictive soil samples standards, or implement a very prescriptive engineering control to protect human health. If the redevelopment plans calls for a parking lot or commercial type redevelopment, you can utilize a different approach to the soil cleanup. The better your LSRP understands your future redevelopment goals and project budget, the better you'll be able to tailor the cleanup to suit your needs. So keep those LSRPs in the loop early on. We're here to help. Next slide. Groundwater sampling is required at a UST closure site when there is a potential for the groundwater has been contaminated. This happens when any portion of the tank is located at or below the water table, unless the tank was removed and there is no evidence of a discharge. You will also have to complete a groundwater investigation if your post-excavation soil sample results exceeded the NJDEP soil standard. It is very common for most UST closure projects to have a groundwater investigation. It does not take much of a discharge to contaminate groundwater in this state. Groundwater remediation at UST sites is a little more complicated, but the good news is petroleum contamination from a gasoline and diesel USTs naturally degrades over time, and active groundwater remediation may not be required. Groundwater investigation at UST sites generally include the installation and sampling of several monitoring wells that allows the LSRP to calculate the groundwater flow direction and delineate the groundwater contaminant plume that may be present beneath your site. You are required to delineate the groundwater contamination both horizontally and vertically at your site. So it's not uncommon for these sites to have lots of monitoring wells installed over time. You may have seen these well covers at lots of gas stations you visit. The depth of these monitoring wells varies with the depth of the water table beneath the site. Some wells may only be installed to 10 feet, while others may be over 50 feet in depth. Gauging groundwater depths periodically is important to understand how gasoline and diesel releases behave underground throughout the year. Seasonal fluctuation in groundwater levels may impact contamination levels in the groundwater. To accurately understand groundwater contamination at a site, groundwater sampling will be conducted during different seasons to account for potential variations in contaminant levels. In some cases, groundwater analytical results from the wells are below the NJDEP standards and no further groundwater work is required. If the groundwater results are above standards, your LSRP can advise you on possible next steps in the groundwater investigation. Some examples may include the injection of chemicals that will enhance the natural degradation of the petroleum contamination, or sampling of the wells quarterly to enable the NJDEP to approve a monitored natural attenuation of the groundwater by issuing a groundwater remedial action permit. Next slide. Here is some good news. In my experience, removing the new double-walled type tanks that were installed as part of the 1988 New Jersey upgrade requirements, it is very rare to see holes like I showed you earlier. I have completed UST closures at approximately 20 gas stations recently with these new double-walled tanks, and we've observed zero discharges related to these new double-walled tanks. We did run into contamination associated with the former tanks, but in general, these newer double-walled tanks are operating properly and really making UST closures easier. There are a lot of options available for both soil and groundwater contamination at these vacant gas station sites. A qualified LSRP like myself will be able to assist you and guide you through the selection of the best approach for your site. The most important thing to remember is that petroleum contamination found at these sites can naturally degrade over time, making these eyesore sites in your community a great opportunity for redevelopment. Thank you. Paulette?
Thanks so much, Mary Kay. Just want to remind everyone, if you have a question during any of these presentations, please type them into the Q&A pane. Sean, if we go to the next slide, that would be great. Environmental liability is a common fear of gas station property owners, as well as the private purchasers of the property and local governments who acquire these sites through various means, including tax delinquency. Rob Crespi, an attorney from CSG Law, will now discuss issues of environmental liability. Rob?
Thanks, Colette. Thank you for having me. Thanks to NJIT for scheduling this event. I am going to, you can go to the next slide, please. I'm going to discuss really more of the basic legal principles that get you to a point where Mary Kay's practical application for the remediation will be applicable. So much of my discussion really is general. It may not apply in every case to gas stations because, again, as Colette mentioned, the size of the stations may preclude some of the just some of the applicable practical applications. So let me just give you some of the basics. Liability under state law really governed I think for this discussion for the New Jersey Spill Compensation and Control Act and the Site Remediation Reform Act. The Spill Act establishes that any person or government entity who has discharged a hazardous substance or is any way responsible for the hazardous substance is strictly, jointly, and severally liable for cleanup and removal costs. And what that means is that if one person contributed to the contamination, that person, even if others also contributed, that one person can be held fully liable for all cleanup costs. And then that person really is kind of, tasked with going after other people to try to get recovery for the other cleanup costs. So it's once you're liable, you can be liable for everything. The Site Remediation Reform Act, or SARA, which was enacted in 2009, and that's the program that also established the LSRP program that Mary Kay is licensed under as an LSRP. So the act was enacted in 2009, and for the first time, actually, even though the Spill Act held entities liable, it did not have any affirmative obligation for liable parties to actually begin a remediation. So that's the kind of the genesis of the sites that were mothballed for years and years, and people, even though they were liable, were not cleaning them up. So the Site Remediation Act put in place a regulatory structure for that established various timeframes once that were triggered by the date that the contamination was discovered. The other statute that often applies in transactions is the Industrial Site Recovery Act, or ISRA. It's not applicable here because gas stations are not subject to ISRA, even though they could be, as Mary Kay described, and as we all know, they could have significant contamination, but they don't fall under the under ISRA. So generally, next slide, please. So as I said, generally regarding condemnation, this is regarding the applicability to municipal entities. The Spill Act exempts government entities from liability under the Spill Act or common law. So that's when the government acquires title to a site, either under its functions as a sovereign or under where it's acquiring them for any means for redevelopment. So in a condemnation, in the context of an area in need of redevelopment, which is consistent with the town's plans, that's promoting redevelopment, and the Spill Act would, the entity of the municipality would not be liable under the Spill Act. More specifically, government entities are not liable for discharges that occurred prior to them taking ownership, as long as they acquired the site through bankruptcy, tax delinquency, abandonment, receipts really for the states, eminent domain, condemnation, or involuntary acquisition. You should note, though, that there's no liability protection to the government if it caused or contributed to the discharge, which makes sense, or if it acquires the property by condemnation or in eminent domain, and the property is already being remediated by another party in compliance with all applicable regulations. So, as I said before, the Site Remediation Reform Act, or SARA, has certain deadlines. If the cleanup is being conducted within those timeframes, then the government, even though it can take the property, would not have the liability exemption afforded by the Spill Act. Next slide, please. So the DEP has created a form or a process where a municipality or any government entity can establish officially that the state will not hold it liable. It's the form, I didn't put it in the presentation. It's the municipal exemption form. And as long as the municipality or a government entity can certify to all these listed items on the form, and this again is in the context of a taking under condemnation or again for purposes of redevelopment, and they can again certify to all these issues, then DEP will grant an exemption officially. And that gives a government entity really some it makes them, can give them some security. Sorry. Okay. And again, the important ones here are they haven't discharged hazardous substances. They're not in any way responsible. They haven't aggravated or contributed to the contamination. They never owned it under like an ISRA subject. There's never been an ISRA subject establishment there. So that's a carve out to this. So if it was an ISRA subject property, again, not applicable to gas stations, but you have to make that certification. And again, as I said before, the property is not being remediated. Next slide, please. Okay, so again, this is just what I just said. It's obviously an important consideration. I just wanted to emphasize it. In 1998, this was the Brownfield Act amendments to the Spill Act. It eliminated the exemption for the government entity that's caused or contributed to the discharge or that acquires property being remediated already. Next slide, please. All right, so the process for taking a contaminated property is controlled by the process that was developed in the case Housing Authority of the City of New Brunswick versus Soydem Investors, which was a case in 2003. So what this case held was that a property being condemned should be valued as if it was clean, and then the estimate to complete the remediation will then be withheld from the funds used to buy the property or acquire the property from the condemnee. And those costs are held in escrow and can be used by the condemning authority to complete the cleanup. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, as I mentioned before, although a condemning agency does not qualify for the Spill Act exemption if it takes title prior to completion of a remediation, it can still take advantage of the Soydem escrow process. So a government entity would be quote unquote liable under the Spill Act, but it can still recover the costs of the cleanup. It can withhold those costs and then use those costs to remediate the property. So it can take the property, even if it's being remediated. It doesn't seem fair, but this is the strength of the sovereign powers, and it's for the public purpose. So it can take the property that is even being completed, even being remediated timely. It can take it, and again, it would be liable or assume liability, which would be a lot of municipalities would not be willing to do that. But it can then hold it can hold those funds to complete the cleanup. And interestingly, the condemning agency can actually seek an escrow amount for a more extensive remedy than the property owner was proposing. As Mary Kay mentioned, you can remediate a property using institutional and engineering controls. So it would not be remediated to what we call unrestricted standards, like residential standards. So if the owner was trying to remediate or planning to remediate using those standards and those controls, the condemning agency can actually seek to remediate to a more extensive remedy. In other words, try not to leave any contamination in place. And that's, of course, it has to be practical to do so. But that's all part of the condemnation proceedings. And the case I reference here, the borough of Paulsboro, the Essex Chemical, that established that properties that have already been remediated, so the remediation is complete, there might be, again, institutional and engineering controls. A condemning entity can't come in and then try to, under SARDEM, try to hold additional money to remediate it to a further standard. So in other words, if the remediation is complete, even if it has some contamination left, as long as it was properly remediated, the condemning entity can't then hold the owner of the property responsible and for additional remediation. Okay, next slide, please. So just getting into the weeds a little bit, there are certain situations where a responsible party who's conducting a cleanup has to post what's called a remediation funding source. It's mostly applicable, under ISRA, which again does not apply to gas stations, but in other situations as well. If the liable parties are subject to a spill act directive or a direct oversight, where the DEP has taken over a cleanup because the owner or responsible party has violated the Site Remediation Act's timeframes, or upon submission of a work plan, which is not as often. Essentially, the law is that the government entities do not have to post the remediation funding source. Again, in those situations where it would have been required for private parties. Okay, next slide, please. As Mary Kay mentioned, if you leave contamination in place, the responsible party has to record a deed notice and have a remedial action permit. In order to guarantee that the maintenance, monitoring, and reporting requirements under the permit are maintained. A condemning party who completes a cleanup has to enter into a remedial action permit, just like a private party. But and the original responsible party, if there was one, would also always be on the permit as well. Next slide, please. So, as I said, the condemning party will automatically become a co-permittee under the permit. But anyone that obtains ownership of a property that either already had a permit or that completes the cleanup and then puts a deed notice and remedial action permit in place has to be on the permit as a co-permittee. The law is that government entities are exempt from the financial assurance obligations that are required under a remedial action permit. So in order to establish the permit, the costs of maintaining and redoing all the reporting that's required for the life of the permit has to be posted in several forms. It can be cash, a letter of credit, line of credit. Now they are allowing insurance policies and sureties, which are a little bit newer. Government entities by law are exempt from the financial assurance obligation, similar to the way they were exempt under for posting a remediation funding source. But the practice of environmental law in New Jersey has always posed some surprises. Very recently, we have a case where DEP, despite the law, is saying that the government entity, in this case it's a county, has to post the remedial action, the financial assurance, again, despite the law, because the original responsible party is on the permit, and that party wouldn't, if the government entity was not involved or was not a co-permittee, that entity would have to post a financial assurance. So we are trying to actually follow up on that, because I think, again, it's contradictory to the statute and the regulations, and I'd never seen it before, so I thought I would point it out. And finally, if a government entity condemns an easement interest, in a property, they have no statutory liability for remedial action permit obligations. But again, it won't be able to modify or amend the deed notice or the remedial action permit because they would have no fee interest in the property. And I think that's all I have for now. Thank you.
Thanks, Rob. Appreciate that. Next slide, Sean. So determining if contamination exists and then remediating that contamination, all of that comes with a cost. And it's really hard to identify where to get those funds, unless you're Sean Vroom, who's going to tell us all about where those funds are and how municipalities can get their hands on some of that funding. So, Sean, why don't you take that away?
All righty. Thank you, Colette, and good morning, everyone. As Colette stated, I'm going to discuss potential funding sources that can be utilized for the assessment and remediation of gas stations. So, as we all know, planning for, assessing, cleaning up, and redeveloping your gas stations and brownfield sites in general has a cost associated with it. And most local county governments, as well as nonprofits, don't have the funds to cover all of those costs. And with these projects, it's also important to incentivize private sector interest in these types of projects. So it's critical to know where to find funding, how to secure it, and how to apply it to your project. So gas station projects, like any other brownfield projects, are funded by multiple sources that may include grants, loans, tax incentives, just to name a few. The key to successfully funding a brownfields project is the ability to bundle those multiple sources, which is commonly referred to as the funding stack. So what I'm going to cover now is not intended to be a comprehensive list of funding sources, but an overview of what I consider foundational funding sources. So the first up is EPA's MARC brownfield grants. MARC stands for Multi-Purpose Assessment Revolving Loan Fund, commonly known as the RLF, and cleanup. These grants are solicited on an annual basis. It's typically in the fall, and the money's typically become available the following late summer or fall, depending on the schedule on when the release date is. So, and entities that are eligible for these grants include local governments, county, state, and tribal governments, and nonprofits. There's a myriad of activities that you can conduct under these grants or eligible activities. The brownfield assessment grants not only give you money to conduct assessments, but you can do some planning work, such as brownfield inventories. You can do community outreach, things of that nature. The Brownfields Revolving Loan Fund grants, they provide funding to capitalize loans that are used to clean up brownfield brownfields. And then you have brownfield cleanup grants, which obviously allow you to carry out cleanup activities on brownfield sites that are owned by the applicant. And then you have the Brownfields Multi-Purpose Grant, which provide funding to conduct a range of eligible assessment and cleanup activities at one or more brownfield sites that are within a designated target area. The RLFs and the Brownfield Multi-Purpose Grants are typically offered on alternating years. This past year, which was an even year, EPA makes the RLF grants available. Next year, which will be fiscal year 2023, the Brownfield Multi-Purpose Grants will be available. So some of these grants do require cost share, which can be in the form of contribution of money, labor, or material, or services. And those services must be eligible for allowable costs. If you take a look at the table here, kind of gives you a breakout. It shows you the amount of funding that you can receive for each one of these grants. I won't go into the details of each one of those. You can see the performance period, as well as whether there's a cost share associated with it. The one thing I just wanted to talk about was the assessment grant. Under the assessment grant, there are three types of assessment grants. There's a community-wide assessment grant, which you can receive up to $500,000 for, where you basically do multiple brownfield sites within a designated target area. They have the site-specific grant, which is for a particular site that you have in mind, and you can get up to $200,000 for that, or $350,000 with the waiver, as long as you can justify the additional costs. And then they had a new grant EPA actually came out with this year, which is kind of like a super community wide. It's only available to states and tribal governments. It's the state and tribe community wide assessment grant. You can get up to $2 million for this. It's a little bit longer performance period. There is no cost share with it either. But it's what it is actually a way for states and tribes to include get brownfield cleanups and communities involved in a cleanup program that don't have the capacity to manage their own federal grant. So that's kind of the idea behind that grant. And then, as I went through before, you have the revolving loan fund grant. You can get up to $1 million for that. Cleanup grants you can get up to $500,000 for, and multi-purpose grants up to $800,000. And again, those last three all have cost shares. The first two have 20%, and the last $40,000. So if you're considering to apply for any of these, you really, I gave you the timeline. You really do need to begin early, like in the spring. There's a lot of census and health data associated with it. You need to identify partners. You need to do some planning work. Site ownership is an issue. So we can, New Jersey Brownfield Assistance Center can certainly help you get started early, point you in the right direction, get you on the right track for the correct grant. Next up is New Jersey Economic Development Authority's Brownfield Impact Fund. It's anticipated to be launched in early 2022. It's going to be available on a rolling basis. It can be used for activities that are associated with the cleanup of brownfield sites, which would include gas stations. It will include loans and subgrants. The loans will range from $50,000 up to $350,000. Subgrants will range from $25,000 up to $350,000. The subgrants require no repayment, and the loans are going to be available to both public and private sector entities, and the subgrants to public sector entities alone. Then we have the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection's Hazardous Discharge Site Remediation Fund, more commonly known as the HDSRF. There's a number of grants underneath this program. These grants are available to public entities, private entities, nonprofits. It's a well-funded program. They get an additional $10 million every summer, and it is also a rolling application process. The three grants that under this program include the assessment investigation grant, which is available to public entities. It's a $3 million cap per applicant. You have remedial action grant. That's a matching grant, and the amount of match is based on the end use for the project. So you can see the breakout here of what the contribution would be. And then you have the nonprofit grant, which is a pilot program with a $5 million cap per year. Of course, the entity to be eligible must meet the criteria of a 501c3. Property ownership isn't required. And then last for this HDSRF is the HDSRF loan, which is available to private and public entities. It funds 100% of all phases of work. And again, it's capped at $2 million, and the rate is equal to 2 points below the federal discount rate for public entities and equal to the federal discount rate for all other applicants. And private entities are eligible for up to $500,000 per year with this loan program. I've also included some contact information. If you have questions about this, I would reach out to Rachel Stopper from NJDEP. She can walk you through this, all the steps to apply for this HDSRF grant. And then last but not least, we have the New Jersey Infrastructure Bank, or the Water Bank. It provides low interest rate loans to qualified borrowers in New Jersey for the purpose of financing water quality projects. Eligible entities include counties, regional authorities, and municipalities, as well as water purveyors. It is available to private entities such as a redeveloper via what they call a conduit loan, which is done as part of the redevelopment plan. Again, you're given low interest rates. It's a very flexible program. They're not afraid of the bigger projects. They've given grants, loans, up to $50 million. So what you need to do is reach out to David Zimmer. He's the executive director. He can, again, you talk to him about your project, see if it's applicable. Some of the eligible projects you could see would be applicable at gas stations, removal of contaminated soil, capping systems, tank removal, so on and so forth. It's a well-funded program. They've given out $9 billion in the last 30 years, at least since 1987 to the present. So good resource there. So what I wanted to do here is just kind of to give you an idea on how these funding sources would be applicable to a gas station project, or the phases associated with the gas station or brownfield project in general. You can see how they can be brought to bear, who the eligible entities are. And again, you can contact New Jersey Brownfields Assistance Center for identifying what funding would be applicable to your gas station project or a brownfields project for that matter. We'd be more than happy to assist you in identifying those potential sources. One thing I want to mention is I very briefly went through these 4 resources. If you're interested in them and you want a more in-depth overview of them, 2 weeks ago we did a Funding New Jersey Brownfields webinar. We've got that recording as well as a presentation up on the New Jersey Brownfields Assistance Center's website. You can go there, watch the webinar. You'll hear it straight from the people that provide these grants. They'll give you an in-depth overview. If you are interested, and again, if you have questions, you can always reach out to us and we'd be more than happy to help you out. So Colette, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you very much. Our next presenter is Robin Lapidus, Executive Director of Love Flemington, who will discuss how the town activated former gas station property while it waited for the sale and ultimate redevelopment of that property. Welcome, Robin.
Morning. Thank you, Colette. So I represent the Flemington Business Improvement District, which is a bid, and I am the executive director. We are also a fully designated opportunity zone, which has been an incredibly helpful designation in moving our development and our economic development forward. And in particular, it helped us with understanding our brownfields better, because there is a great opportunity within the opportunity zone to connect with brownfield resources and experts. So I am, I believe, representing the mantra that is de-risk your properties first, because while it's scary to, as a municipality, dig into gas stations and other types of brownfields. There's so much expertise that's free and available through Colette and Sean's organization and through the NJEDA. And we have an example of a gas station property right on our main street that probably would have is a great case study for how it would have been really helpful had we met everybody on this call first. So that's my that's really my starting point. Next slide, please. So just a little background about Flemington. We have location in central New Jersey. We are an hour from New York. We're an hour a little bit more to the shore. We're an hour from Philly. We're a beautiful rural county with great healthy living and affordability. Next slide, please. So we are the county seat of Hunterdon County. We are the only opportunity zone in Hunterdon County. We are 100% every commercial property in our borough is opportunity zoned. And we are also one of New Jersey's donut holes, which I prefer to think of as the jewel in the crown. So we are fully surrounded by another township. Next slide, please. And our township that Flemington Borough is surrounded by is very wealthy and has great demographics. It's a wonderful place to live. Flemington Borough is also a wonderful place to live. It's 1.4 square miles, so it's pretty tiny. And our population is about 2,900 people when we send mail to every address. And I think there's about 4,000 people living in Flemington Borough at the moment. Next slide, please. We are surrounded by 1,600 farms. And I put these slides side by side because it kind of really shows you the dramatic impact. You know, we're surrounded by farms, and yet this is the site remediation list of everything in the tiny donut hole or jewel in the crown of Flemington Borough. So we really have a lot of former gas station, foundry, and other contaminated brownfields. Next slide, please. We're, you know, hip and historic. We have a lot of past railroad history, a lot of past agricultural innovation, and a lot of still some factories. That picture up at the top is Stengel Pottery Factory, and some that has also been repurposed and redeveloped into a very awesome, thriving farmers market and art center. Next slide, please. So here we are at our extremely iconic 144 Main Street gas station, and I have to say that the owner of this property, the new owner of this property, is hopefully in the audience and can give you a little benefit of his wisdom in the Q&A if he wants to pipe in. Next slide, please. So 144 Main was revitalized and is about to be redeveloped. And this is, you know, you can kind of see how close all the buildings around it are housing. There's a building behind it that is historic, but you really can't miss this when you drive down the historic Main Street of Flemington. And Flemington's historic Main Street and Flemington Borough is, I think, almost second on the list of places on the National Historic Register for historic buildings, and mostly historic homes along the Main Street. We have incredible architecture. We have people coming daily to take our walking tour and look at our architecture. And I wish I could have shown you the other side of the street, but when you look across, this is what you see currently. Next slide, please. So our organization, the Flemington Community Partnership, the Flemington BID, took over the gas station, and in I think 2017, 2018, and created something called the filling station. That's our logo right there. And it became a weekend beer garden destination. And we had, as you can see, it's all ages. It's fantastic family experience, and it became extremely popular. Everyone in the neighborhood rode their bikes there. They walked there. We usually had a car show that coincided. People from out of town came, and for a town that has prohibitively few liquor licenses, and that's almost none, this beer garden in the filling station was just beautiful, iconic, and extremely fun, and really, truly a destination. Next slide, please. So we use this space regularly for this contaminated space, formerly contaminated space, for picnicking, bands, flea markets, Halloween, parades. Pretty much every special event was held on this site. And at our busiest night, we had 500 people, and people really wanted us to take over the property and continue to use it in the same capacity. Next slide. So again, when we weren't there making a filling station, it continued to look like this. And next slide. So what are the things that made it great? It had a low asking price. The asking price was $299,500. The borough took over the property after it was bankrupt and was no longer being used as a gas station and car repair. It's really an important location in the town. It was owned by the borough, and there was always an intention to not use the property for the municipality, but to return it to the private sector. It had a history of neglect, and at the time when I made this slide, there had been a lot of interested parties, but nobody really had the wherewithal to roll up their sleeves and figure out what the property needed as final remediation to move forward. So next slide. So we did receive this clearance after DEP and the borough worked out an arrangement where the DEP would clean up the property. The borough would pay some fee to have it remediated. The property would go through a public auction and be sold, and the borough would get back some of the money from the sale. And once it was sold, it was returned to the public register and would move on to its next incarnation. And that's easier said than done. Next slide, please. So this is my welcome to the new owners of 144 Main Street. This is them in their hazmat outfits. They are Skylar Bird and his wife and his family, and we are so thrilled to have this property because it is so important to our Main Street's future to come in and do all this work. And so just really quickly, the plan is for it to become a breakfast and lunch destination with baking on the premises, and it's owned by former restaurateurs from New Hope. So just a little history on the timeline. The initial reporting of the contaminants on this property started in March of 1992. After there were lots of years where the DEP had to work to try to figure out where the contamination was coming from. And the borough took over the property around 2010 and worked with the DEP to come up with a remediation plan. When the new owners took over the property, they actually found additional tanks, which was just an oversight because it really wasn't what was being looked at in the remediation plan. These additional tanks were not, no one was really specifically looking at them or for them. So the property owner had to then negotiate again with the borough and the DEP to come to some arrangement, which they have, and they've since done more removal. Next slide. This is what it looked like inside currently. This is actually what it looked like inside while we were using the property for revitalization. Next slide. This is some of the remedial work that the current owner has done after purchasing the property. Next slide. This is a beautiful sketch of what we hope this property will look like very soon. I believe we're on track for having for them to go before the planning board with a design in January, and hopefully late spring, early summer, we'll see more activity, but they are fully on board to move forward. Next slide. In the interim, the FCP, my organization, and the borough have worked together to get a neighborhood preservation program grant, which is really exciting because it's all about placemaking. And we have called this area the Southern Gateway. We're now calling it the South End. And really, the gas station property will be a centerpiece of this new district that we're working on developing more of a sense of. Next slide. So this is really the south end of the borough where the gas station is located, pretty much on Main Street, right in the middle, right by the railroad tracks. And, you know, within this new NPP district, there are about there's one gas station and probably about 4 or 5 other brownfields. And while this is a placemaking grant from NPP, you know, it does really talk about the transition between commercial and neighborhoods. And we have to really de-risk the future opportunities to make this a better place for everyone to live, work, and play. And that is all I have to say at the moment.
Well, thank you, Robin. Appreciate that. Our final presenter is J.R. Capasso, who's the Brownfields Coordinator for the City of Trenton. He'll present the city's strategy for dealing with the many gas stations in the city and the results of that strategy. Welcome, J.R.
Hi, thanks, Colette. This is these slides are a portion of a presentation that I gave back in 2004 at the Brownfields Conference in St. Louis, Missouri. So it was interesting to go back and revisit. But although regulations and other things have changed, you know, real estate markets are cyclical. The reason why you want to look at or for gas stations and the reasons why you want to try to have them redeveloped and develop a strategy still basically the same. So I became the Brownfields Coordinator in 2002. I was a former consultant. So I wanted to look at site history and wanted to look at identifying other brownfield sites from historic information. And at the same time, there was funding coming out of US EPA for petroleum remediation. Next slide, please. So these are some of the funding sources that we used. The US Fields grant was a kind of a one-time pilot program by the EPA when they were just starting to look at gas stations. Their hazardous material grants started in the mid-90s, but there was certainly a call for dealing with gas stations and other petroleum contaminated sites. Now, originally, the petroleum funding was different than the hazardous materials funding. So you'll see that the city received 3 petroleum assessment grants, 2003, 2007, 2011. These grants have now been combined into the brownfields grants that Sean talked about. There's no longer a separate pot of money for petroleum and hazardous materials. So you can apply for the EPA's brownfields funding and you could use it on petroleum contaminated sites. By my recent look, we've dealt with at least 22 gas stations using the brownfields grant funds and also the state HDSRF funds. And again, although this working with gas stations and other sites has gone back quite a ways, we're still working on gas station sites and other brownfields. Next slide, please. So why look at service stations? Colette and others talked about why you look at them or why you look for them. You can assume that you'll find many more former gas stations than you actually think we have. I'll discuss more later, but there are about 13 gas stations in Trenton right now. The results of my inventory identified close to 150. So, and these gas station sites represent eyesores in neighborhoods, but they also represent good opportunities for development, especially those gas stations that are in high traffic areas where most of them are. And in fact, some of the more high-profile locations, those sites never really became brownfields. They went from becoming gas stations to becoming other things. And there is a before and after here of a site that was for sale some time ago, and this is what it was most recently rehabbed, still for an automotive use, as many of these gas stations are. Looking at the work scope for a site inventory, you want to develop a list of former and existing gas stations and then make decisions based on redevelopment potential, public health, and other factors. You want to look at historic resources and find out what the historic uses were. And you also want to look at sources of information for any compliance history. I will discuss in a little bit the high percentage of former gas stations in Trenton that have never been investigated. And in fact, they've been redeveloped, and there could still very easily be underground storage tanks still in the ground. As part of our work, we did do GIS mapping of current and former sites to help select sites for additional work. The tools for the site inventory, next slide, please, include all the information that you would typically use for a preliminary assessment or a phase one. We use chain of title information. There's other similar ownership information in City Hall. Also, we used historic Sanborn maps and city directories. This slide on the left shows a portion of a Sanborn map that actually shows 2 gas stations in the center, and it actually has small round circles, which are the symbol for underground gasoline tanks. That would be areas you would want to target for any geophysical investigation, test pits, site investigation activities. These 2 gas stations are now under a surface parking lot that's owned by the state of New Jersey. The site just to the north of that, which was a coal yard back in the 1920s or 40s, that was also the site of a gas station later on. On the right, you see part of a city directory, which is kind of like a crisscross directory in that it lists street names, addresses, and what was at a certain site for that given year. And so we have city directories that go back to the 1930s, back to the 19 teens, and they go up to about the 1970s. Next slide, please. So looking for compliance histories, there used to be more state databases, but now most of those databases have been combined into NJDEP's data miner site, which Mary Kay showed 1 or 2 pages of listings of data miner page. So that would be a good recommended starting place. Once you identify where are your former gas stations are, you can search them by address or by name, by city, by zip code. It's a fairly useful, searchable database. The only thing that I would caution is if when you go into Data Miner, if you put your city, if I put Trenton, New Jersey, I'll get 2,500 line items to look at. So it is searchable and you can refine your search. Local records can be good. In City Hall, you'll see permits potentially for tank closures and tank removals. And these could also date before the DEP's tank regulations in the 1980s. And I'll talk about that in a minute. Next slide. So this is a piece of our database, which shows the compliance history. On the right, the column on the right has information that you can easily get off of NJDEP data miner, shows whether the sites are closed, whether they're active, what the case numbers are. And you can use all this information to figure out sort of what's gone on as far as remediation history, try to figure out if the site is closed with no restrictions, in which case you can sell it easily, or if it might have loose ends, which most of them do, which you could still sell, but would be more difficult. You can also see in the center column, all of the, basically our entries from all the city directories, and the map information shows you who was operating at the site at the time. It also has petroleum company names, which could be companies that you could go after who may have some old liability for the site. So if you can find somebody else to be liable, that's great. Next slide, please. Other information that you would include on a database would be information that could help you make redevelopment decisions, site information, current land use, former land use, location, zoning, redevelopment areas. So, and that's all. We have one big Excel spreadsheet with 150 gas stations locations on it. Next slide. So the results of our inventory back then, as I said, we found there were 13 currently operating gas stations. We actually found 148 former gas station sites, and some had compliance history, some did not. The most important being that over 50% of these gas stations, former gas stations in the city of Trenton, had absolutely no compliance history. Many of them were developed or closed before DEP's regulations came about, and a lot of mom and pop type gas stations made decisions to go out of business before the regulations took place. And actually, right now I'm in the middle of removing tanks at a location where the tanks were closed in 1987, right before the regulations took place, and we found out that they were full of concrete. Now I have to deal with the concrete also. So what happened and why? Why did all these gas stations disappear? So you had the tank regulations in the 80s, came out in the 80s, the federal ones first, then the state regulations, caused a lot of the mom and pop gas stations to close down. Also in 1998, next slide, please. In 1998, the DEP passed additional regulations for upgrading systems, vapor recovery. In general, it made owning a small, low volume gas station really not economically feasible. As you can look around today, you see large gas stations with numerous pumps, and they probably make more money selling coffee than selling gasoline. But that's the reason why there are so many less gas stations to be seen now. But what we have is a lot of former gas station sites that are going to have to be dealt with in the future or whenever the next redevelopment opportunity arises. So what did we do with our initial inventory? We selected a subset of 8 city-owned gas stations, including the one pictured here, which now has a 3-story office building and a Starbucks on it. We did preliminary assessments in geophysics, the geophysics to look for tanks. Sometimes they're there, sometimes they actually have been removed by previous operators. We did some site investigations where it was warranted, and to date, for those first 8, one site was remediated using a federal cleanup grant and is now a community garden. We retained 1 for open space, 2 are now parking lots, and 3 of the 8 were sold for redevelopment. 1 we still have in our current inventory because it requires additional investigation and remediation. Next slide, please. Actually, the site that was turned into a community garden is at the top right. It received a $100,000 EPA cleanup grant. We removed 8 small tanks from that site. It's probably the smallest brownfield site ever to get federal grant. It's just a little triangle that once had a gas station on it. One thing that has happened more recently, the reason why there's a brownfields program in Trenton is because the cost of investigation and remediation far exceeded the cost of the property. We just did a privately run auction on city-owned real estate, including selling a few brownfield sites and a few gas stations. And actually the prices came in quite high. So we are now going to use this opportunity to probably try to sell as much real estate we can in Trenton and maybe thin the inventory a little bit and try to get these sites back into productive use. And with that, I'll turn it back to Sean and Colette for Q&A.
Thanks, JR. Appreciate that. Before we address your questions, I want to make mention of the services the New Jersey Brownfields Assistance Center provides. We provide free technical assistance to all New Jersey county and local governments, as well as nonprofits who have questions about or are challenged with not only closed gas stations, but other former industrial and commercial properties that may or may not be contaminated. We have a website that has a lot of great information, and you can see the web address there. We have social media platforms. We ask that you follow us. And if you have any brownfields related questions or you would like to receive free technical assistance from us, please do not hesitate to call or email us. Our phone number, our email address is on that slide, and we can, through the course of the conversation, we can tell you the many ways that we can help you out. So I'm going to turn the program over to Sean Broom to facilitate the Q&A portion of the webinar. Sean?
Okay, thanks, Colette. Yeah, we have a few questions. The first one, I believe, would be directed to Mary Kay. That's the time when it was asked. So does this brownfields approach, and I'm assuming they're talking about the assessment regulatory approach, apply to dry cleaners as well?
Yes. So basically in New Jersey, the definition of a brownfield is if it's vacant, if the dry cleaner is operating, it's not a brownfield, but if the dry cleaner is vacant and the building vacant and it has perceived or real contamination, it would be classified as a brownfield in New Jersey.
Okay. Next question is for
So,
Rob.
hey, Sean, if you don't mind me adding,
Yeah,
this is
absolutely.
JR.
Go ahead.
As a result of the success of our our gas station inventory, we actually recently, like say within the last 5 or 6 years, we did an inventory of dry cleaners as well. And we just received a new assessment grant to look at city-owned dry cleaners, which is probably a subject to something else, another program you could do, because the dry cleaners are much scarier even than the gas stations.
That's our next webinar.
This next
Good.
one. The next question is for Rob. If a municipality acquires a closed gas station and then uses that property for a community event such as a farmer's market or pop-up event prior to cleanup of contamination, does the municipality have any liability issues to be concerned with?
So first of all, I'll add, or I will echo the issue on dry cleaners. It's I saw an estimate that 75% of historic dry cleaners have contaminated groundwater. So they're, I think, bigger problems because of the contaminants than gas stations are. Regarding the question, it's an interesting situation. So, and I think it's very fact dependent, but obviously if there's surface contamination that the municipality is aware of, you certainly wouldn't want to have people on the site. If it's a site that where there might be a contaminated gas tank or even contaminated groundwater, but the surface isn't impacted, there's no risk to human health or the environment. So I don't think there would be any exposure. Of course, anyone can sue anyone. So that always has to be taken into account. The other thing is if the site is undergoing remediation, there's going to be a sign on the site that says that the state requires, it's public notice, that says that there's environmental contamination or there's environmental remediation going on, and it lists the name of the LSRP. So they call Mary Kay and ask for information. So, I think that the site can be used, but it has to be prudent and with the knowledge of what's at the site. As long as your municipality has established its Spill Act exemption, liability exemption, I think it can be used. But again, just some prudence should be exercised.
Okay. I guess I would want to just kind of expand on that a little bit. A question for Robin. When you gave your presentation, you showed that you had an intermittent kind of uses before this gas station was purchased and then going for redevelopment as a food venue. So what in that area where that gas station was located in Main Street in Flemington, was there a lack of like a park or a common or a community park that you'd be able to do events similar to that? I'm just kind of trying to get a feel for what affected the draw in getting people to want to participate and go to those events on that site.
Absolutely. We do have a lack of playful pauses, public parks, and gathering spots on our main street. And unfortunately, some of that is because some of the spaces where we would want to have those activities are, you know, uh, they're underutilized. They have historic properties that were being fought over in court for future redevelopment. So we were making makeshift to find a spot where we could have some open space and have some people. But to that end, we did shore up the building. We did put in some flower boxes and some plants, and we added electricity separate from what existed there before. And we actually brought in everything each time that we set up there. Each weekend, a truck came in to do the beer. And we actually used the site as a place with picnic tables where people could order food from our local businesses and have the food delivered to their table. And we just sort of performed the concierge good host service, because we really wanted to support the local businesses by creating this space, and in a lot of ways, it's kind of the space that people created during COVID. And we did this just as an amenity so people could sit and drink a beer outdoors, and enjoy our local restaurant food.
Great. No, that's some great ideas. And that's why I wanted you to just kind of go over that so that if people are thinking about how to use these sites temporarily until they get to their ultimate reuse, get kind of the wheels, the creative juices going. So
I will just add that the buyer of the property, who I believe is in the audience today, told us that we could continue our activities on the spot because it works with some of his schedule, that he's more of a breakfast lunch place. And if we wanted to continue to use the space in the evening, that would be great. But we actually decided that our community beer garden and performance space should move around to other sites that we can revitalize and bring attention to. And that's also how we're using this as a bringing attention to what could be in these sites if they get revitalized and get more attention. And it's exciting. Thank you.
Great strategy. Thanks for that. Okay, so our next question is, what does MARC stand for? So MARC is the EPA Brownfields grants. MARC stands for Multi-Purpose Assessment, RLF, and Cleanup Grant. So that's kind of all encompassing. It's actually all, like I had stated earlier, they do alternate the revolving loan fund grants. Those are offered on even fiscal years. The multi-purpose grants are offered on odd fiscal years. So you basically go from an ARC solicitation when they send out the guidelines or the request for applications, and then a MAC. So it's either MAC or ARC, depending on whether the revolving loan fund or the multi-purpose grants are offered that go around for that solicitation. Next question is, whichever panelist wants to jump in on this one and share your thoughts. What are the panelists' thoughts on repurposing these abandoned gas stations as electric vehicle charging stations? So whoever wants to jump at that, feel free.
I mean, in my perspective, it's kind of a no-brainer if the sites are needed. I mean, it's a surface use, even if the site is, there's still groundwater contamination requiring remediation. That doesn't interfere with the surface use. So, it's non-contact, it's safe. I mean, it sounds like a great idea. And obviously if these sites are smaller, that may be really well suited for them.
And location as well.
Correct.
Anybody else have anything to add? I don't see any other questions that have come in, Colette.
I don't see any as well. Do any of our panelists want to say anything else? Any parting words, any advice for our viewers?
Well, I could add one thing. I'm happy to add one thing. Rob talked about the Spill Act and the Spill Act exemption form, which is important to get that in if you are exempt from the Spill Act, as the City of Trenton's Brownfields program. But you have to really guard your Spill Act exemption, both to the consultant world and to DEP. Both, municipal brownfields programs, we are not Spill Act liable for sites that we take either for redevelopment purposes or through tax foreclosure and other means. But not all LSRPs and consultants actually work with municipalities, so they don't always understand that, and they have to be reminded. One of the things we actually negotiated with DEP during the last round of Site Remediation Act changes was to remove, for instance, we removed the mandatory timeframes that other responsible parties are required to follow. Municipal brownfield programs are not required to follow those timeframes because they understand that we basically survive on grants. Grants take time. Sometimes we deal with sites and sometimes we mothball them until funding becomes available. So you have to keep your eye on that. Identify some of those people at DEP, like the brownfields folks who do understand what your liability protections are. I've also had some DEP, enforcement folks show that they obviously don't understand what Spill Act exemption means, and sometimes you have to protect yourself from those folks.
Good points.
Any other parting words from our presenters?
I would just add, as a small town municipality representative, getting connected to through the resource center is really wonderful, because once we had, I don't think we really had any idea how much funding, expertise, interested people to talk to. I really don't think we really knew that this was as readily available, and how helpful it would really be. And that now is the time for us to talk about all the dry cleaners and all of the other brownfield issues we have, so that we really can have an economic development plan that is speedy and effective. And I just would really encourage all the other smaller municipalities to really take advantage of the resources and get connected. Thank you.
Thank you for that plug. We appreciate that. Any other comments before we close out today's event?
Colette, Sean, I just want to remind everybody to fill out the post-event survey. We really do appreciate your feedback. It helps us improve these educational forums, and it also gives us new ideas for other topical webinars that we can put on for you.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
Dry cleaners.
So I want to thank today's presenters. Thank you so much. We really appreciate all the presentations, all of your comments, all of your guidance and suggestions. I want to thank all of you who tuned in. A recording of this webinar will be posted on our website. Also on our website are the postings of the recordings of all our other webinars. So we invite you to download them and view them. In the new year, the New Jersey Brownfield Assistance Center will be hosting other webinars. So if you have any ideas of what you'd like to see in webinars, please let us know. We look forward to bringing those events to you. With that, I'm going to say goodbye and thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you.